Mount Hakadzin loomed motionless beneath the harsh, cold night sky. Baring his teeth and holding his breath, the hunter sized up the distance to his prey. His finger always settled on the sniper rifle's trigger like it belonged there. That day, Iori Aizawa shoved off for the mountains again, like he couldn't stay away. He had no idea this trip would spark the start of his brand new life in a whole other world. And it all kicks off with a tiny wolf cub prowling the slopes of Hakadzin. The day before, the peasants practically groveled at Iori's feet, begging him, the great hunter's heir, to save their fields from a rampaging wave of wild boars. Then the old grandmother leaned in and whispered, warning him about the wolves, the legendary messengers of the gods. Hungry wild boars tore through the forest, gobbling every single shoot and mushroom in sight. Rage boiled inside the mountain god, and it was dead serious. And now that enraged crowd is sprinting straight at Jordan. The boy didn't even blink. His eyes stayed locked like nothing could shake him. The leader's grotesque face got pinned inside the crosshairs, like the world finally stopped moving. A thunderous shot detonated in the air. With their leader gone, the herd erupted in panic and bolted for their lives. The shoes whispered through the tall grass with every quiet step. A massive boar carcass lay on the ground, bleeding out with no mercy. Iori quietly clasped his hands, honoring the life that was cruelly snatched away. A hunting knife flashed like a blade of lightning. The boy expertly laced the prey onto a thick, sturdy branch. Suddenly, he spun around hard, blade raised and ready to strike. From behind the trunk, a tiny white creature, splattered with blood, poked out hesitantly like it wasn't sure it should breathe. Iori dropped into a seat in pure shock. The little one looked way more like a feral dog puppy than a wolf. It looked downright heartbreaking, thin as a whisper, battered to the brink, barely hanging onto life. The hunter sliced off fresh meat and flung it onto the leaf like he meant business. The tiny creature lunged like a beast, snapping its teeth into the flesh and devouring greedily. Iori watched him in stunned silence. He knew, no doubt, that meddling with the laws of nature was a guaranteed disaster waiting to happen. But he couldn't stay away. He rushed in and carefully wrapped up the child's wounds. At night the boy dropped into a deep, sound sleep inside his tent, like the whole world could wait. A crisp mountain morning finally rolls in, bright and razor clear. Iori slung his backpack, gripped his rifle, and pushed even deeper into the forest. He skidded to a halt and whipped his head over his shoulder. The hunter's face snapped tight with tension. Behind him, tucked in the bushes, a bandaged cub limped on, refusing to stop no matter what. Iori let out a heavy sigh, then bluntly said he couldn't take him with him. The kid shot up with pure joy to meet him. The boy stared, awestruck, into those sapphire eyes, and couldn't wrap his head around it. Why the wild beast wasn't scared of him at all. He had to bolt right away, or he'd get so attached it would ruin everything. Iori shook his head hard, shoved away the useless thoughts, and shoved the little one aside. He spun around out of nowhere and bolted for his life. The helpless little wolf cub sprinted after it, chasing it with pure desperation. Iori snapped his eyes around, terrified that something was about to jump out. The ground under my feet was violently trembling like it couldn't hold itself together. A brutal earthquake tore into the rocks beside the old shrine, cracking everything in its path. The little wolf cub yelped in terror, staring down from the very brink of an abyss. The ground buckled beneath its paws, and the baby dropped like it was yanked by fate. "Watch out!" Iori yelled, frantic and breathless. He yanked off his backpack and sprinted straight ahead. The hunter dove straight into the void with zero hesitation. His fingers locked onto the cliff's edge with a death grip, not letting go. With his other hand, he clutched the rescued wolf cub to his chest like it was the last warmth in the world. Aizawa Iori clung to a snapped branch above the abyss, clutching a helpless white wolf cub to his chest like it was the last thing keeping him alive. The tree let out a brutal crack, like it was splitting from the inside out. The young man trembled as the truth hit. This was the final end. A snapping branch tore loose above him, and as he tumbled down, a cruel stone slashed into his head. Darkness. From the dark void, a gentle voice suddenly cut through the silence and shouted his name. Iori lay sprawled on the grass, motionless in some twisted unknown place, blood pooling as he bled out. He snapped back to awareness and fought to open his eyes. Then one of them just wouldn't budge. A magical hand flashed its enchanted sign and thrust it toward his face, swearing it would bring his sight back. Warmth surged over the wound, and the pain finally started to fade. With a jolt, Iori rose, and there, blazing against the massive twin gates, stood a radiant figure right in front of him. The stranger finally introduced himself as Ryan, this world's god and guide, steering souls wherever they're meant to go. "Wait, so I'm dead?" the young man asked, calm as ice, like he couldn't believe the words coming out of his own mouth. Ryan smirked and shot back that they were just seconds from the afterlife. He jabbed at the glowing doors where feathers spilled down in a storm, insisting that was the road straight to paradise. Then his eyes snapped to that grim gate. Flames roared around it. Black shadows crawled over it, like the world just opened a straight highway to hell. Iori couldn't shake the feeling that this choice screamed too cliché, like it was doomed from the start. Most souls get judged without even being asked, but somehow they made an exception for him. God leaned in and demanded to know which road he'd dare to take. Ryan didn't expect an instant answer, so he snapped at the young man to look down at his own feet. A low, trembling whimper echoed from below. Right there, the rescued white wolf cub sat watching. The young man softly ran his fingers over the little one, then demanded to know why he'd risked everything. Ryan kicked off the tail right where it gets wild. Mount Hakudzen was packed with wolves, and that's where everything began. Iori was stunned. He genuinely believed they'd already been wiped out by deadly diseases and ruthless poachers. The local mountain goddess guarded the wolves, and she adored that dazzling white cub more than any of the rest. Because of that color, his own relatives turned on him, and even his parents kicked the poor kid out of the pack. The goddess was crushed to the core when she realized that the wolf cub was about to face a starving death completely alone. Her grief hit so hard that even the mountain's blessing slipped away. The animals went berserk, and the goddess swooped in to power up little hunter Iori, only for him to stubbornly refuse. Rage surged through her, and she ripped their bond apart. Then, out of nowhere, the young man threw himself into the abyss to save a helpless wolf cub. Right then, boom! A blinding flash tore across the space, and a brand new gate crashed into existence. Ryan leaned in and told them those doors weren't just entrances. They opened straight into the divine realms of their world. Behind the curtains, a sad girl with deer antlers slipped out, none other than the goddess who begged to grant these two a brand new life. Rayun threw an apology over her shoulder, admitting she'd gone way too emotional. The god himself finally confessed that he was dying to see with his own eyes the person who had stirred the goddess so deeply. The girl bowed her head and told Iori he had every right to tear into her for this pointless death. The young man met her gaze without flinching and flat out admitted he chose that jump himself. He'd made a lifetime out of the hunt, so when fate finally came knocking, he was already locked and loaded. The goddess wasn't soothed for a second, and then she declared she'd already set them up to be relocated to another world. Iori demanded they spill every last detail. A classic rebirth would wipe every last memory clean and reset them back into helpless infants. So Ryan pitched a relocation plan. They'd save his memories, then wipe the slate clean by resetting his body back to a fresh 13-year-old. The goddess swore she'd back them with total support in this brand new world, packed with magic and monsters. She edged closer, pressing her point, telling her not to bury her real desires. Iori didn't flinch or look away. He shot back that the only thing he wants is for the goddess to smile like she used to again. Iori stood before the magical gate, clutching an injured wolf cub to his chest, and with full confidence he picked the option to transfer to another world. He spoke in a steady voice like a promise. If the mountain grants grace, the beasts will finally stop terrorizing the villages. The young man pleaded with the goddess for mercy on the land, swearing he'd take the fluffy outcast in and treat them like family. The goddess cradled the white creature to her chest with fierce tenderness, whispering that it was her beloved child. She slammed down an iron decree. From this day on, Mount Hakudzin would be drenched in endless abundance. Space detonated in blinding light, and right before Iori could show up, radiant Mr. Ryan burst into existence. The deity beamed with real warmth, praising the boy as truly worthy and wildly generous. Before he left, the young man only pleaded with them, warned the villagers he'd vanished so they wouldn't panic for the orphan. Meanwhile, back in his native village, a lavish feast was already being thrown together, ready to explode the moment he arrived. The old mistress slumped onto her hand, eyeing Iori as she waited with the promised meat for dinner. Locals were buzzing like crazy, trading excited stories about the brand new delivery of a whole mountain of top-tier wild boar meat. Everyone still fondly talked about that young hunter, the one who tracked and took down those wild boars himself. The whole village lit up with joy over the resettlement program's success, and they were already throwing plans together to celebrate that hardworking young man's big win. Everyone felt weightless inside, like their souls finally exhaled and found peace. Even though the welcome party was still way too early, the news rolling in over those mountains was absolutely amazing. Everyone held their breath and silently prayed their hero would crush this brand new pack. Night crashed in, and a blazing full moon lit up the pitch-black sky. Iori was fast asleep in the thick grass, while his fluffy buddy curled up right beside him, like it was guarding his dreams. The baby softly licked the young man's face, and he blinked awake with a groggy, sleepy haze. The boy dropped to the ground, stared around in total confusion, and took in the strange forest drenched in silver moonlight. The beast's fur glistened even brighter, like it had pure power woven into every strand. Iori stared at the wolf cub, and to his shock, it looked like it had grown right before his eyes. "Nope, you didn't shrink by accident, you've gotten smaller," snapped the fluffy one, sharp as a blade. Jordan's eyes shot wide with pure shock. He staggered back, stunned out of his mind, because that creature had just spoken human words. The beast flashed a huge grin, practically bursting with joy because it finally got to talk with its savior. Out of nowhere, Iori winced in agony and clutched his own face. The wolf cub fidgeted in panic, blurting out questions about the sting in its wound. But the boy froze in shock. Then his missing right eye flickered back to life and started seeing again. Right in front of me, the screen snapped to life. System classified the beast as divine, chained by a subordination contract tied to Iori. That memory hit him like a punch. Ryuan actually handed him the magical eye, not the lost one. The pupil throbbed with unbearable power as it read the magical agreement's terms. Still reeling from the shock, the young man steadied himself, shot a quick glance at his companion, and started mulling over the name. He named the newborn Zen after his own native mountain, and the baby happily snatched up the name like it was always meant for him. That peaceful calm got shattered by a savage roar. Zen caught the scent of enemies and snapped an order. "Stay sharp, stay cautious." Iori snapped himself together in a rush. He had to find a safe spot, and he had to do it now. They sprinted to the crystal spring below the towering cliff, where cold water gushed and licked the rocks at its base. Leaning over the water, Iori burst out in pure joy, thrilled that he and Zen finally had the same eyes. The boy flashed a playful wink, grinning at the same great color, and Zen laughed along, happy to agree. Yeah, now they really looked alike. Zen jabbed a finger at the stone steps crawling up to the cave in the rock, and right from there, Ryan's familiar magic blasted out. Iori stared at that water-choked cave, completely baffled. Like, how the heck was he supposed to get in, and did he seriously have to swim there? He leaned in and skimmed the water's surface with his fingertips, soft as a secret. Total silence hit, then the whole space exploded into blinding light. With a thunderous roar, the water split wide, and a dry path opened up below, waiting like it had been there all along. The boy couldn't stop himself. He stared in awe and even compared this miracle to the biblical tale of Moses. They pushed ahead, hauling themselves out of that suffocating stench the forest monsters left behind. A system window flashed. This holy spring wasn't just water, it was an absolute shield, a protective zone that monsters couldn't cross. At the very top, They stepped in and faced a dark cave that felt strangely safe. Iori finally figured it out. The flying island's source wasn't just magic. It was a sanctuary, a safe zone where danger couldn't reach them. The warning carved at the entrance shouted one thing: once you step in, you're trapped in the unfathomable forest of demons, where savage monsters prowl without mercy. Even with that creepy vibe hanging in the air, the boy didn't feel any divine protection watching over him. The sky got torn open by jagged peaks of uncharted rocks, sharp enough to cut your breath. The decisions made Iori, and the loyal Zen stride straight into a brand new life, daring this deadly forest to become their home. A young sniper in the starlight gripped his rifle, a fierce wolf at his side, and they both charged into war against the orcs. Silent stone wolves stood guard at the shrine entrance of Mount Surakami, like they were watching everything. The horned goddess loomed in front of the magical mirror, like it was about to reveal her destiny. The boy broke into a bright, joyful smile as the white wolf stared back. The goddess smiled softly as she renamed the beast Zen. Up in the harsh mountains, the cave's entrance swallowed the light and stayed pitch dark. A holy island hung in the sky, floating there like a secret only gods could reach. Water streamed non-stop from the ordinary flask like it had a mission. The Zen tore into the bowl, slurping greedily as he burst out, all fired up, bragging that the water tasted unbelievably delicious. Yori stared in awe at the magical seal at the bottom. No matter how much water he poured, it never ran dry, and it tasted unreal. Even his whole travel bag, and everything stuffed inside it, got completely swapped out. Even that old tent has been upgraded into a fancy, luxurious marquee. The boy snapped his eyes open in pure shock. Inside there sat furniture, a full bed, and a roomy kitchen that felt like it could handle anything. On the table sat a handy magical stove, and a stone controlled its flame like a secret switch. My stomach snarled with hunger. Yeah, it was officially time to hunt down food. While Iori was digging through his gear, he stumbled on his old knife. Then the goddess dropped a shocking gift in his lap: 2 revolvers and a real sniper rifle. He lined up the shot and pulled the trigger, blasting the revolver. The bullet slammed into the stone, blew it apart into a scatter of rock, and then vanished into thin air like it never existed. The weapon unleashed the magic of creation itself, automatically spawning fresh ammunition on demand. Zen caught that sweet, familiar whiff of apples, and the crew instantly split up to hunt down supplies. Wind hissed through the treetops like a secret being whispered. Before long, the basket was overflowing, stuffed to the brim with nuts, mushrooms, and dripping, juicy fruits. Zen's panic scream ripped through the silence, and the wolf pleaded with Iori to do something, anything. Right before their eyes loomed the orc general, a hulking, pig-faced nightmare wielding a pound-weight hammer. The monster with the swinging attack slammed the ground, blasting sharp fragments outward like vicious hail. Iori snapped to his crew, realizing they couldn't survive that enemy's onslaught, and ordered them to retreat straight to the spring. As he sprinted, he whipped a look over his shoulder and spotted something clamped in the wolf's teeth. The boy bolted forward, legs barely keeping up with his panic. The Zen dog sprinted right alongside him, gripping a tiny creature in its mouth like it was the most precious thing in the world. The wolf snapped the truth on the move. An orc had attacked the little ones, and he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Turns out the rescued kid was a kid at all. It was a carbuncle, a phantom creature with a rare gem, and now it lay there unconscious. Suddenly, the gem on his forehead blazed with a blinding flash. The carbuncle blinked awake, and Zen barked, "Hold on tighter." They sprinted through the field like their lives depended on it, pushing every ounce of strength just to get away. They slammed to a sudden halt, like something unseen just yanked the world to a stop. A squad of higher orcs slammed into the path, cutting off every escape route. A massive hammer with a sharp whistle came crashing down right where Dory had just been standing. In the next heartbeat, the guy barely wrenched his rifle up in time, smashing the axe's swing away with the butt. The enemies closed in, trapping them in a tight, deadly circle. Zen's carbuncle let out a sorrowful whimper as despair hit, while the wolf tensed like it was bracing for the worst. "Are you scared, Zen?" The voice boomed inside his head. The beast snapped right to attention and recognized him immediately. The goddess told him, "Your bodies get stronger," and then he stood tall himself, the mighty divine Fenrir. Zen's aura detonated with pure power. He tossed aside his fear, ready to go all in to protect Iori and the baby. Meanwhile, the boy launched into the bushes like a rocket, blasted there by the orc's brutal punch. He snapped upright unscathed, stunned by how insanely stronger his brand-new body felt compared to before. Suddenly, fear slammed into him, and he remembered his friend. Iori stood there, completely stunned and frozen in place. Zen energy surged through him as he slashed his paw in one brutal sweep, sending the orc flying away. Sharp claws sliced through the air, tearing deadly streaks in their wake. The monster got hurled backward and slammed into the cracked ground so hard it stuck there, wrecked stone ringing under it. The boy's eyes widened as he stared, stunned by his friend's real divine form. Yet another orc, axe cocked high, slipped in behind the wolf without a sound. Zen snapped around in a blur and flashed a savage grin at his enemy. Magic ignited in Fenrir's eyes, and a glowing magical circle snapped into existence right on the orc's chest. A brutal burst of magic tore through the creature, ripping straight through its body. The orc's eyes blew wide with pure, death-sure terror. Iori wasn't wasting a second. His sniper's smoking barrel had already locked onto the next target. A gunshot cracked the air. Then that massive orc crumpled to the ground, and Iori surged forward, frantic to see if Zen was all right. Three pig-like monsters froze in shock, completely caught off guard. Zen stayed completely unharmed, sealed safe, behind a powerful magical barrier. At that exact moment, the remaining enemies got swallowed by roaring black flames. Iori finally got it. This little creature had just saved them, using pure skill. He casually twisted the cartridge and smirked, saying he just dumped all his mana straight into the bullet. All that's left of the enemy is a deep, scorched crater, ripped open by something brutal. Grabbing a shovel, Iori started digging in the dirt and burying the body, because leaving a corpse lying around is just filthy. Zen leaned in and sniffed the defeated orc, eyes wide with curious intent. The wolf told Iori the monster reeks of the exact same tasty meat, and Iori blurted, shocked, "Wait, you mean pork?" Zen swore the orc smelled insanely delicious, but Iori froze. Can you even bite into a humanoid and call it food? The system flat-out confirmed that orc meat is safe to eat and tastes just like pork. And the boy instantly remembered what his grandfather always said about processing game the right way. Then it hit him, clear as day, his grandfather at the table, drilling him in the art of hunting and cooking, so his grandson could survive out there on his own. Iori froze for a heartbeat, letting silence slam down around him. Zen's happy little whimper, drool already flying because that raw meat was calling his name, yanked him right back to the real world. Right by the campfire, Iori suddenly clocked something that didn't add up. It's a stone that only comes alive when you catch it with the right eye. There it glows faintly, like it's hiding a secret. The description made it sound like he was standing face to face with the real stuff, rock salt you could actually eat. The boy rubbed his eye and gasped. His magical vision was the real reason he'd tracked down that spice. Fueled by pure excitement, he sprinted straight to grab the other ingredients right away. A full week goes by. Then bam, they've carved out stairs and built an entrance, turning the cave into something usable. Inside the cave, the kitchen was fully stocked and set up like a proper base, plus the supplies had clearly piled up. They even uncovered jaw-dropping local plants and fruits, plus a wild natural wine that somehow took the place of both sauce and miso. Zen beams as he yanks a full basket of fresh greens, shouting for Iori, while that tiny creature on his head squeaks happily like it's in on the fun. Iori couldn't even blink. Inside that basket sat potatoes, onions, ginger, and shockingly, sugar beets too. The boy grinned because with those beets, he could finally pull real sugar and load up his pantry with spices for good. Turns out, this little creature didn't just stumble on the recipe. It hunted down every single ingredient by itself. With that kind of firepower at their disposal, they finally managed to whip up real human food. First, he hacked into the back of the slain orc, stripping away every scrap of fat so he could render it into lard. First, he heated the animal fat until it hissed, scraped away the foamy top, and chilled it down until the lard was finally ready. Iori shot a warning that this fat won't be eaten raw, but the wolf only sniffed once, then leaned in like, "Wait, it smells amazing, so is this food." The salted, soy-slick potatoes got tossed into the blazing fat, sizzling like they meant business. The animals chugged their portions in seconds, then immediately started begging for more like they'd tasted heaven. After making sure the locals could finally chow down on human food, Iori got straight to business and started simmering the stewed meat. He melted the sugar, poured in the sauces, tossed in the meat, then let it all simmer on low heat until it hit perfect flavor. Zen and the baby fidgeted in pure impatience, spinning around the steaming hot pot like they couldn't wait one more second. Iori flashed a grin, waved them off, and told them the meat still had to be cooked all the way. While lunch hit the stove, he leaned over and pushed the idea. "Let's hunt down more ingredients while we wait." In the middle of the forest, the wolf snapped to attention. He suddenly picked up people nearby, circling around like they were hunting without showing themselves. The Zen let out a loud sniff that confirmed exactly what everyone feared. The animals just couldn't wrap their heads around it. Why those people wouldn't come any closer. Yori remembered the baby had been marked as a contracted familiar, and he couldn't wrap his head around why his family couldn't find him at all. So he snapped and decided they'd handle it. Go meet those people face to face themselves. The boy's stomach churned with nerves, because this was his very first time meeting the people of this world. Meanwhile, a tired crew of adventurers wandered in circles, convinced some sneaky illusion had swallowed the pack. Their fluffy familiar fox practically blazed with light as it scanned the forest, hunting for something just ahead. A magical crystal shot into the sky, and just like that, it fizzled out, because the barrier simply couldn't be broken or dispelled. The fox swore this wasn't the filth of monsters at all. It was a brutal punch of sacred power, right on time. The leader's jaw dropped. Someone was secretly guarding their missing friend with holy magic. She could feel it, familiar warmth, bright joy, and the unmistakable sense that everything was right there, close as can be. Suddenly, one of the swordsmen stiffened dead in his tracks, staring straight ahead like he'd seen a ghost. On the scorched, ashen ground, a lone wooden cross stood there, cold, silent, and staring into the ruin. The warrior girl crouched over the mound, sniffed out the truth, and declared the grave was fresh, because monsters don't bury anyone. They hacked into the earth, and the second they uncovered it, they recoiled in horror at the sight of a giant dead orc. Cold sweat erupted on her skin when she realized the killer of that monster must be insanely powerful. Right then, the familiar shot its head up toward the sky like it had just heard something nobody else could. The commander bellowed, "Something's coming, brace yourselves." And then a predatory bird dropped from above like a meteor, right out of the sky. A deadly stone bird swooped down and, snap, turned its victims into stone statues. The leader barely slipped out of the claw's swiping strike. The seekers clamped down hard on the weapon, gripping it like they meant to tear destiny open. The familiar blurted, "This enemy scans your magic the instant it's cast, then dodges every spell like it's nothing." The fox warned, "This opponent is way too dangerous. Before long, they'll feel your power, thanks to all that incredible mana." The commander clenched his teeth, took the biggest gamble of his life, and poured every drop of mana into one unstoppable bow shot. Out of nowhere, an invisible shot tore straight through the bird. The monster got ripped apart right in midair. One brutal blow ended it, and the seekers could barely process what they were seeing. Just then, snap, a savage crunch erupted from the bushes nearby. A total stranger barreled toward them at full speed. The commander roared, "Hide now," and everyone scrambled for cover. The familiar warned him straight up, "This new predator is way more deadly than the bird ever was." From the thicket, Iori slipped out, calm as ever, wolf in hand, cradling the missing little animal like it was precious, then innocently asked if they were its family. The girl snapped her eyes wide, stunned to the core. The adult warriors froze in disbelief, staring like, "Wait, our savior is just some ordinary kid." The adventurers and the rescued magical beasts sealed their brand new bond with a hard, shaking handshake. The rescued mother fox looked up in tears and thanked her hero for saving her baby. Walt made it a point to show that young man how much he truly appreciated him. He shot a message to his squadmates and pulled them in. He gratefully threw his whole heart into thanking them for saving Chromis and every single member of his family. The young man could barely manage a whisper as the word family slipped out. He smiled softly, like he knew exactly what was coming next. The kid stepped up, said his name was Iori, and proudly introduced his fluffy partner, Zen. The adventurers froze in shock at seeing the kid alone in that deadly forest, and demanded to know who he was. Walt's face went stone cold. No time for small talk, because monsters could still be hiding nearby. He cringed up to the guy and awkwardly begged for a place to crash for the night. Confused, Iori lowered his voice and asked his wolf for help on what to do next. Zen steadied himself. The strangers reeked of the same scent as Chromis and Lucia, so they weren't a threat. The boy let out a shaky breath of relief and nodded, agreeing without hesitation. He warned them, "I've only got one cave on a tiny island," then grabbed the guests and led them in. The island exploded into a blinding glow the moment they arrived. The adventurers shot each other stunned looks. This place wasn't even listed on any guild map. Iori charged straight toward the very edge of the shore. With just one touch, the stormy waters tore open and parted, laying a clear, dry path through the chaos. Walt froze in shock. As Iori stumbled through an awkward explanation, the stunned leader couldn't even process what he was seeing. He stared ahead and knew, right there in front of him, stood the real chosen one of this holy land. Meanwhile, the fox yanked Zen away to the side, quietly guiding him out of the chaos. She leaned in and whispered, "Tell me, was our savior an apostle?" The wolf shoved the idea aside, remembering the goddess's command, "Just live free and don't overthink it." The fox snapped that right in front of her stood the real children of the gods, and that Zen was the unstoppable Fenrir. The wolf's cheeks burned with embarrassment as he begged to keep his divine origin under wraps. She gave in with a soft, immediate yes. Walt stared at Zen with respect, stunned by how he'd tamed that wild beast. The fox finally admitted it. He was the one who rescued her cub. The adventurer dropped to his knees, breathless, and thanked the wolf like it just saved his life. Zen snapped back with a low, threatening growl, daring him to step closer. Walt's companions freaked out, shouting that predators like these never bond with people. Yori let out a low, quiet snort. He burst into laughter and said Zen wasn't angry at all. His stomach was just growling like crazy because it needed food. Soon, the boy called the guests over and ushered them into the tent he just finished setting up. The guests hit the threshold and froze, because the moment they stepped inside, the room somehow kept stretching wider through magic. Yori slammed a steaming hot pot onto the table and hurriedly apologized for how tight it felt. The animals burst into pure happiness, wagging their tails like they couldn't contain the excitement. With the lid lifted, the kitchen exploded in the most unbelievably tender, slow-stewed meat aroma. The adventurers gulped hard, tasting fear as their throats went dry. Yori didn't just share. He treated everyone like they mattered, showering the whole group with kindness. That meat just melted on my tongue like magic. It hit way softer than I expected, and there wasn't a single nasty aftertaste left behind. The shocked woman blurted, "Wait, what seasoning is this? Is it really just green onions and ginger?" Turns out the secret was a killer marinade of green onions and ginger. The guests looked mortified for finishing his dinner, but Iori just grinned and promised he'd cook up more. Right then, he realized the portions just wouldn't stretch for everyone. He burst out in pure excitement, yelling that he'd just scored some brand new meat. With a brutal thud, Iori slammed a massive bird leg onto the table like he meant business. Walt's eyes went huge, and shock slammed into him so hard he started stuttering. Iori calmly laid it out. "This is the real meat of the stone bird." Then boom! The stewed pork turned out to be the very general of the orcs. The adventurers roared together in perfect sync. They swear those monsters can only be beaten by a whole crew. So tell me, how did he ever end up running into it alone? The young guy just shrugged, and then right on the road, the bird swooped in and attacked him. A monster tried to petrify him on the spot, but his special eye drank in the magic and left it powerless. Seizing the opening, Iori leveled his rifle and fired. Walt shook so hard his hands flew to his weapon. The second he grabbed it, that brutal weight slammed down on him so hard he almost went down. For Iori, that metal felt feather-light. Yet for everyone else, it clamped heavier and heavier with every passing second. The fox snapped its attention to the blessing, and the weapon answered only its real master. The boy nodded hard, because in that moment he finally remembered the grandfather who'd handed him this inheritance. It was his grandfather who drilled him in weapon handling, hunting, and gutting the game from start to finish. And then his grandmother handed over every last cooking secret she'd ever mastered. In the blink of an eye, a towering heap of crispy golden fried pieces burst onto the table. The recipe spills the real secret: potato starch, a soy sauce and ginger marinade, then it all gets fried in hot oil to perfection. The beasts lunged for the treat and chomped down, eyes squeezing shut like pure joy took over. Walt's partner couldn't believe the game had a crust so crispy it practically crackled in your hands. She took one bite and went, "Whoa, this flavor and scent are on a whole different level." Zen caught it instantly. His master lowered his head before that hacked-together altar. The boy placed an offering before the gods, thanking them for the brand-new, peaceful life he finally got to live. Meanwhile, up on the mountain of the gods, a long-abandoned temple loomed in silence like a forgotten threat. Food rose out of Iori's altar and materialized right in front of us. The horned goddess broke into joyful claps, like that first offering in decades had finally come. She froze for a split second, because she remembered monster meat could strip her clean of her status. But his stomach betrayed him with a loud, treacherous growl. In the blink of an eye, she was stuffing her face with both cheeks, practically melting from how divine it tasted. Inside the tent, Markle drifted off, replaying the sweet memory of drinking in his mind. Iori snatched a bottle of natural wine the moment it was time. The moment the adventurers took their first sip, they were instantly hooked, drunk on that sweet nectar pouring from the forest spring. At last, the boy brewed chamomile tea for everyone, determined to knock the whole room out into a deep, good night's sleep. Beneath the starry glow of the demonic forest, the man soaked up the cool night air and nursed steaming, fragrant tea like it was pure comfort. He stared at Iori like something was off, then demanded to know why he was out here all by himself. The boy went completely still, like his soul just hit the brakes. He stopped dead for a heartbeat. Then he grinned and told him, "My mentor dragged me here to train," like it was no big deal. The girl knight nearby recoiled at the idea of such a cruel teacher, but Iori snapped back that he'd brought magical items to shield them. An aristocrat leaned in and demanded if the young man was thinking about becoming an adventurer. He pitched the idea to the Paulette Guild and swore the coins from that slain bird would be more than enough to live comfortably. Iori nervously rubbed the back of his head like he didn't know what to do with himself. The kid innocently blurted out that he'd planned to use those feathers for plain old broom making. The guest's eyes bulged with pure shock. The boy held a lavish, shimmering feather in his hands, and it burned with magic light like it was alive. The aristocrat finally snapped, and a full-on burst of laughter exploded out of him. Iori kept fidgeting, foot to foot, like his nerves were about to explode. He leaned in and murmured, "Did you say something stupid?" Still wiping his tears, the group leader laughed it off, said it was hilarious to watch all that luxury get squeezed into silly little trifles. Then the young man fished out a whole bundle of feathers and offered to share them with total sincerity. The man firmly shook his head and refused to take that precious gift. He said it's better to be satisfied with what fate hands you and stop hunting for more than you need. Morning sunlight blazed across a towering rock sanctuary, making it feel like a sacred fortress in the sky. A soft breeze danced through the trees, swaying the leaves like they were alive. The crew huddled up to head out, thanking their warm host with heartfelt goodbyes before they finally left. That little eared creature stared up at the massive wolf with a sad, shaky look, because they'd finally cracked friendship, and it still didn't feel right. Iori stretched a roll toward the fluffy guest sitting on the path. On the vivid green leaf sat a mound of glossy, shimmering candies. The animals gaped in shock, staring at the treat like it had just appeared out of nowhere. The tiny creature slowly chomped off a piece, savoring every bite. His eyes sparked instantly, like pure joy just burst to life. Zen popped a candy in his mouth, and it hit so sweet it made him almost jump out of his skin. Iori shrugged and told them he'd made it all while pulling beet sugar out of the process. The cooking was insanely simple, and it was done in a flash. Zen burst into laughter. After a whole night of drinking, sugar hit like pure electricity. Once he heard about the hangover, he yanked out another roll like it was the only cure. Mint candy sat there, cool and tempting, like little hits of sweetness waiting to be found. The girl knight blinked in shock, because this herb was normally reserved for wiping out nasty smells, not for anything like this. After she took a taste, her whole body went still. The flavor hit this perfect sweet and fresh combo, with just a sharp little bite of bitterness at the end. Mint's taste crushed the pain instantly, and it kept him from paying the price for overeating. The group's leader blew it again. His speech vanished right out from his mouth. He gasped in disbelief that only aristocrats get to taste sweets like this. And with that kind of intel, Iori could land a job in a state institution in no time. Then he leaned in, voice deadly serious, and demanded to know why that kid trusted strangers so fast. Iori shut his eyes tight. He leaned in and admitted, in a hushed voice, that they'd gambled their lives in that deadly forest just to save a friend. With his wolf by his side, the young man let it all out. He wasn't trying to be deep. He was just thrilled to meet people who genuinely put family first. In a flash of sunlight, the magical feather flared to life again. The boy passed it to his husband as a treasured keepsake from the day they met. He flashed a warm smile, then took the gift like it was pure proof of friendship. With a sharp motion, he hurled a heavy coin at the young man. He told her to stay safe, call out his name in Pollet, and use it to unlock every door. He spun around and swore to the guild that they'd hold his place. Their silhouettes melted into the forest mist, fading away like they were never there. Iori and his wolf said goodbye to their new friends, and a quiet sadness clung to every step. That girl spilled their secret ages ago, then made a vow to stay quiet forever. A savage wolf let out a bone-chilling howl that ripped through the night. The boy leaned in and promised his friend, "We're going to the guild for sure." But first they had to get stronger, real, dangerous, powerful. A giant horned bear tore out of the bushes in a thunderous roar. Iori charged straight at the monster, rifle clenched in his hands, and fear didn't stand a chance. Swinging the weapon like a cannon blast, right on the edge of impact, heavy paws slammed into the ground. He lunged forward in a blur. Those sharp fangs flashed like a warning in the dark. The young man and his beasts barreled into battle in perfect sync, moving like one unstoppable machine. Far away from everything, their mentor looked on, brimming with pride at every step they took. With a quiet prayer, she wished them luck, and ordered them to stay close to the people of this world. 5 years went by. Then boom! A monstrous explosion ripped across the earth and shook everything to its core. The smoke finally thinned out and slipped away. A defeated, blood-soaked basilisk crashed out of the sky with a thunderous roar. The impact blasted the ground, and stones flew out in every direction. The mature Iori towered over the carcass, grinning like he'd just won, and proclaimed that dinner would be roasted meat. Right beside him, his loyal wolf loomed, now gigantic and absolutely unstoppable. The young man grinned with real sincerity, like he was about to sprint straight into brand new adventures. The young wolf cubs were stuffing their faces, laughing in the presence of a young man, and a giant white wolf looming like a guardian. Above the forest, thick black clouds smothered the sky like a coming storm. Someone was frantically stomping the grass to pieces, like they couldn't wait another second. 2 tiny wolf cubs pushed through the tangled thicket, side by side, forging ahead no matter what lurked in the brush. Skal dragged his sister Patty by the hand, pleading with her to sprint forward and never, ever look back. He spun around on the spot and fought off 3 hulking orcs with nothing but a wooden sword. The club slammed into the tree, and it cracked with a brutal snap. The boy froze in shock, staring wide-eyed at the weapon fragment in front of him. Rage-filled monster loomed over him like a nightmare about to strike. Skal shot forward and threw himself in front of his sister, taking that brutal hit on his own body to shield her. The last shred of hope died right in his eyes. The orc hauled his club high, lining up a fatal smash that would end everything. Suddenly, a colossal shadow slammed through, wiping the monsters off the battlefield like they were nothing, and hurling them aside. Skal snapped at Patty to run. No clue yet what had just saved them, but panic was already roaring. Suddenly, the girl's face went chalk-white, and she gasped that a horrible fever had taken over. The brother went completely still, and panic hit him like a wave. His eyes bulged with pure horror. A gigantic shadow swallowed the space in front of them. Skal launched at the huge monster, trying to lay eyes on it and make sense of what he was facing. The boar completely froze in its tracks, like it had seen a ghost. A sharp, predatory whistle tore through the air like a warning no one could ignore. Rapid movement. Blinding flash. A pair of vicious claws tore straight through the air itself. The punch landed in a blink, 1 second, then instant chaos. The blade tore straight through the enemy's thick armor like it was nothing. Blood erupted across the scene, splashing everywhere like a nightmare. In the dead of night, 2 predatory eyes snapped open and burned with menace. The beast let out a rough, guttural growl that shook the air. The boar froze in pure animal terror, like it couldn't breathe. In the pitch black, the giant beast snapped its razor fangs wide, ready to tear into anything brave enough to stand there. Skal let out a quiet goodbye to life, the kind that hits before it even makes a sound. The giant wolf burst forward and lunged at the enemies, roaring like it meant to tear the whole battlefield apart. The surviving orcs trembled, still alive, but shaking like they'd just seen the end of everything. And then they bolted, no looking back. The beast slowly swung its huge head toward the children. A feral wolf towered over the trembling boy, looming like a nightmare that wouldn't let him breathe. The scroll's heat finally died down. He clung to his sister with shaking hands and begged the predator to take him instead. Anything, just not her. A sharp yellow eye studied the little one with razor-focused attention. "Relax, Zen won't hurt you," a calm voice reassured him. Yori, fresh out of the forest with a long rifle in hand, demanded, right out loud, if the kids were safe. He greeted them with a warm handshake that felt like pure welcome. Skrull sucked in a sharp breath, because right in front of them, someone was standing there. The boy snapped into a sharp frown, like something just set him off. The tiny one flinched back hard, eyes locked on that outstretched hand like it couldn't be trusted. Yori took the rejection in stride, calm as ever. The young man tore himself away from Zen to watch over the little ones, then sprinted off to wipe out the orcs. Suddenly, a frail hand latched onto his cloak. The wolf snapped into motion and called the owner, dead serious with worry. The beast inhaled her scent, then snapped that the girl reeked of poison. Yori snapped a quick check to Patty's forehead, and the little girl was trembling hard from that brutal high fever. He scooped the unconscious girl into his arms and felt it. She'd been poisoned by a toxic plant. This was a milestone that instantly wrecked the body. Paralysis hit hard, and convulsions ripped through. Skal clung to the rescuer's cloak with everything he had. The young man slammed his fist down and swore, "I'm saving her, no matter what." He grabbed his terrified brother's shoulder and swore there was still a real chance. "So act right now, no hesitation." They sprinted straight to the mountain hideout before the danger could catch up. Yori instantly yanked out a wooden first aid kit. To rip the poison out of his body, he brewed a special antidote herb and drove it straight through his veins. The young man leaned in and smeared healing ointment over Patty's wounds, slow and precise. Then he ground the pills to powder to drive the temperature down. He swore that this decoction would wipe the last traces of poison out of his body, then made him down it, right alongside a cup of tea. Her life force slowly started to surge back, breath by breath. Yori slid a steaming cup of hot tea to the drained Skal. Mid-sip, the boy jerked to a stop, eyes widening in pure shock. The drink hit his tongue, and right when his guard was crumbling, a wave of safety crashed through him. The boy broke down in bitter sobs, buried his face in the young man's chest, and spilled every ounce of terror he'd been through. Meanwhile, storm clouds started stacking up over the mountain, dark and threatening. After the tears finally stopped, Skal crumpled into a deep, heavy sleep. He cracked his eyes open and found himself lying in a soft, cozy bed. And he almost shot up, because right beside him, this giant wolf was peacefully snoring like it owned the place. Iori soothed the little one with a grin, teasing the fearsome beast like it was a hungry glutton and a total softie. Zen bristled the moment those words hit him. The kid finally blurted out his name, then learned the rescuer was living right here, sharing the place with a wolf. Suddenly, a faint voice echoed through the air. Patty snapped back to her senses and rubbed her eyes, totally baffled. Her brother came charging toward her, breathless as he bombarded her with urgent questions about how she was holding up. The girl blinked, like the world just hit a reset button. She scrutinized her hands like they were hiding a secret, and with a bright grin on her face, she shouted that nothing hurt her at all. Skal was fighting back tears of pure joy. The two little ones bowed with heartfelt gratitude to that young man, and to the wolf who saved them. Patty suddenly sniffed the air like something was about to go down. A huge pot on the stove was violently boiling, bubbling like it couldn't wait for what came next. The wolf cubs yelped together, screaming that starvation was killing them. Iori whipped up a thick, hearty soup loaded with tomatoes, pork, and beets. He set the meat to simmer with cabbage and bay leaves. Then he tossed a hot pile of veggies into pork fat, sizzling them to perfection. And I sprinkled in fragrant herbs and squeezed in fresh lemon juice, like the final spark to make it all explode with flavor. Skal carefully scooped up the brew, like every drop mattered. His eyes went wide in shock. He dove into the soup and started slurping it down so greedily that manners vanished the second it hit his lips. Iori whipped up lunch with a bright grin, and the two wolf girls tore into it like they hadn't eaten in days. After the illness, he begged them to hold back, but they just ignored him, cheeks puffed as they clamored for seconds. Inside the steamer, the fresh potato bread was just about to come out, bubbling hot and ready to steal the show. Next to it, cool fruit water sat there, refreshing and ready to hit. Chilling at the table beside Zen the giant wolf, the boy leaned in and demanded how they ever ended up trapped in this forest. The girl paused mid-step, and she dropped her eyes like she couldn't face what came next. She remembered her daring parents. One time they agreed to travel with a merchant, but that farewell toast turned into a nightmare, and her father's body suddenly fell to paralysis. The landlord turned out to be a slave trader, and he sneered as he appraised the beast's wife and daughter like they were premium merchandise. Rage blazing, the father tore into the scoundrel and shoved his kids into a desperate sprint, escaped through the forest, straight to the city of Artgil. Shaking off the poison's grip, he barreled into the bloody meat grinder, ripping chains and mercenaries apart with his bare hands. Just as the mother died, the broken father clutched at his last breath and swore that their family would be protected in the city for sure. Iori stood there in tight, breathless silence as the confession landed. The girls swallowed their fear from that first meeting and apologized straight to their faces. With tears streaming down her face, the girl admitted they had nothing left from their parents, so even her father's swords had shattered to pieces. The boy slowly stretched his hand out, like he was daring fate to strike back. He softly ran his hands through their hair and showered them with praise for surviving, because to their parents, they weren't just children, they were the precious treasure everything else was built on. Tears streamed down her face as the she-wolf begged, "Can we really stay here? And are the people over there truly kind?" Iori shot back that in Pollitt City, he's got an old friend who treats familiars like their family. He pulled out an ancient coin, and finally admitted he'd kept his friend waiting way too long. Iori declared they were headed to Pollitt, and that he'd take them himself. Then the stunned girls burst with joy, practically begging, "Is that really true?" This boy had been grinding for this moment for years, like his whole life was counting down to today. Inspired by everything she'd heard, the girl clenched her fists and blurted out, "Can I become as strong as my dad?" Iori nodded at the cave entrance. This was the perfect battleground to train and push himself harder. A full week slipped by. The Zen lazily yawned across the glade, stretching like it had all the time in the world. Iori smirked as he confidently redirected the girls, perfectly timed wooden sword blows. One of them dropped down from above and snapped into motion with a sudden leap. The boy snapped into action and, in a single move, stopped both attacks like it was nothing. The sun slid behind the mountain, and the sky started burning with that last golden glow. The girl beamed and plunged into the scorching barrel of water. She stared at Iori's jaw-dropping power, and it still somehow dwarfed what her own father could do. Her sister slid in beside her, and they both basked in that warm, cozy feeling like it was pure heaven. They swore it wasn't luck at all. Turns out their parents were the ones who led them here to this amazing place, surrounded by good, kind people. The girl glanced off to the side, lost in deep thought. Sister teased that they might be able to skip Artgil altogether. But she pushed back. Her father trusted people, and she just wanted to find others who were just as kind as Iori. A brand new morning finally dawned, lighting up the world like a fresh start. All three scrambled onto the back of the giant Zen, ready to launch the moment they were cleared to leave. Iori slung his weapon over his shoulder and barked, "Move out." The wolf exploded forward with one thunderous leap, rocketing away like it had a destiny to chase. The girls erupted into joyful screams at the insane speed. Powerful claws raked the dirt, tearing deep into the ground. The forest screamed by in a blur, swallowing everything behind them. The boy spun back around, and relief hit him hard when he saw their real, heartfelt smiles. He stared in disbelief at these kids' strength, because after all the horror they'd lived through, their hearts still hadn't turned to hatred for anyone. Before they knew it, the forest vanished behind them, and then a settlement burst into view on the horizon. Iori sensed people nearby, then snapped his orders to Zen, "Shrink down fast." The massive beast shot through an instant transformation and shrank into a tiny puppy. The girls erupted into cheers, clapping their hands in pure, breathless wonder. Then, out of nowhere, a stranger slammed into their path and blocked the way. 3 armed horsemen rode up like they owned the night, demanding they be handed every single bit of value. The leader flashed a grin, laughing at their kindergarten like it was a joke. The twins' expressions snapped into pure rage the moment it happened. The bandit came flying in with a furious shout, ordering them to drop their gaze. Iori let out a heavy sigh and warned them, "Don't you dare upset those kids." At that exact moment, the girl snapped her foot up from the turn and kicked the leader straight in the face. She sprinted in to cut down the accomplices with her sword as they stumbled back in full panic. After they wiped out the enemies, the sisters blinked innocently and asked Iora if this was some kind of serious situation, or if they just overpowered them for no reason. Iori barked at Zen to make the horses haul the bound attackers straight into the city, and he made it clear they reeked of bandits. At last, the majestic walls of Palit loomed right in front of them, and an old friend's reunion was waiting just beyond the gates. The travelers finally burst into Palit after the long, brutal journey. Massive city gates towered up ahead, swallowing the horizon like a looming wall of destiny. On the cold ground, the grim bandits slumped with their hands bound, those same monsters who'd been feeding on helpless travelers in the forest for years. Iori brushed off the praise like it didn't matter and pointed to 2 tiny wolves nearby. "That's their work, not mine." The guards stood there, utterly dumbfounded, because they couldn't wrap their heads around how those tiny, fearful little creatures had beaten anyone at all. When he heard the kids were left to rot as orphans, one soldier's voice cracked, and a tear finally spilled. A tense silence crashed down. The guard snapped himself together and told the young man he had nothing to fear. The little ones were just fine. In Polti, there was one iron rule everyone knew. Every orphan toiled the fields and got educated under the church's watchful wing. Once they heard about safety, the girls lit up and traded excited glances. But Iori sensed their power and pressed guard Portos for a totally different route. The soldier stared in disbelief, thinking the whole idea of turning 5-year-old kids into adventurers was pure madness. Captain Roddy suddenly stepped up and defended the boy. The veteran officer locked eyes with him and realized this young man had real, serious talent. He urged the girls to team up with Iori and his familiar, and the she-wolves lit up with pure joy, ready to stomp straight into their parents' footsteps. Iori snapped back in shock, but the kids were already cheering for Zen the dog to join the team, and the guard couldn't help but find it hilarious. The soldier urged them to march straight to the guild to get registered. The young man finally admitted straight up that he wasn't just passing by, he had to go for the scheduled meeting. He whipped out a gleaming coin and demanded they tell him. Had they ever heard of a man named Walt who'd handed it to him 5 years ago? The guards gaped in stunned silence at the old silver coin, etched with a rabbit. One of them rushed in, shouting to Mr. Walt that his man was finally here. Iori's jaw nearly dropped. Seriously, are these soldiers this impressed by Walt? Without any explanations, he was ordered to slam his hand onto the magical crystal ball, which was meant to scan him for danger, then blaze him with a red light if it found trouble. The second Iori's fingers brushed the crystal, a blazing blue light exploded from it like a breath of pure power. Right ahead, Pollitt Square burst to life. Merchants hawking their goods and towering monumental buildings looming over everything. The young man spun around in awe, and you could tell he'd never seen a city this huge in his life. Out of nowhere, his eyes snagged on a tiny, unremarkable iron goods shop. On the screen sat a plain black pot, looking totally ordinary, like it had no idea it was about to become a problem. Iori's eyes ignited with a wild, fanatical gleam. He tore over to the seller to ask about the lid, but the dishes had already been chopped up and sold, so there was nothing left. Still, the young man grinned as he strolled down the street with his new purchase, while the she-wolves kept staring like, why does he need a second pot? Iori lit up and told everyone this is totally normal, then casually said he'd just make the wooden lid himself. The guard finally caught up, panting as he admitted he'd already been spooked by the boy's sudden disappearance. At last, they marched right up to the guild's towering stone fortress. The guard leaned over the counter and ordered the elf to register the kids. That sweet girl beamed and practically begged them to come over. She spread the parchment out and promised, I can write every name myself, or you can dictate them to me. The little ones snatched up the pens with bright pride, proclaiming they could write beautifully all by themselves. The sweet newcomer couple got an elf girl's warm, playful wink like a welcome kiss. Iori snatched the pen with full confidence. He spun back and asked, do I really need to register the familiar too? That elf girl flashed a sly grin and said she already knew them, Iori, and the dog Zen. The young man went stone still, because he couldn't figure out how they'd ever heard about them in the first place. Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs, cutting through his thoughts. Someone big was coming into the hall. Iori flinched. He whirled around sharply. A hulking man with an eye patch swaggered up and introduced himself. Cosimo, the ruthless master of the Pollitt Guild. He said Walt wouldn't stop talking about the boy. Every 5 years, clockwork, like he had to get the message out. The master leaned in and demanded, so it's true. Does Iori really live in the demon forest, where the hunting is so good you can practically smell the monsters? Cosimo narrowed his eyes at the young man. No luggage in sight, even though the guild would have happily bought every trophy. Iori calmly patted his tiny bag, and boom, it turned out to be magical. In the very next beat, he casually yanked a massive monster carcass from her side and warned her, dead serious, that there'd be more than enough materials to go around. Cosimo and the elf suddenly lost the power of speech. The master didn't say a word. He just pointed straight to the material reception area and guided the guests there. Behind the counter, a gloomy kid with glasses was busy slicing up a beast, and Cosimo snapped his name like it was urgent. The second Berthold heard his name. He snapped his head around, grumbling like it had set him off. Cosimo told Iori to lay every single thing on the table right now, while Berthold handled the sorting and decided what got accepted. With a deafening boom, Massive shells smashed down as tusks and mountains of meat crashed onto the floor. Bertold gaped in pure shock at the flawlessly processed carcasses, still refusing to believe a boy pulled this off all by himself. Cold sweat drenched Cosimo. This many monsters wasn't something one guy could handle. It took a whole army to even keep up. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream tore through the room next door. The she-wolves cowered together, trembling with fear. The master let out a tired sigh. Every day sounded the same in that guild: loud noise, non-stop brawls, pure routine. In the workshop, the warrior thundered at the old gnome, demanding he turn his precious materials into weapons. The gnome flicked the stone away in disgust, sneering that it was cheap junk. Then that stench hit him, and sickness started crawling up his throat. The young gnome assistant scrambled to soothe the old man, then shot off frantic apologies to the client. The furious warrior jabbed his finger at the wall and demanded they forge him the same wolf-headed shield. The master snapped back at him, calling him second-rate, and slammed the door on making any copies. The distorted warrior let out a gut-wrenching roar and swung hard to slam the dwarf in the face. But the massive fist slammed forward with everything it had, and still never connected. Yori snapped into action and intercepted the attacker's hand in a blur. The crunch hit, and an iron grip clamped down on someone else's wrist. Cosimo stepped in at the last second, voice like steel, and warned the troublemaker that brawling in the guild is a total no-go. When he realized the odds were stacked against him, the warrior backed off in panic, scrambling away while hurling a weak, pathetic threat as he fled. The gnome let out a shaky breath of relief and thanked Iori with all his heart for pulling him out of danger. But the old gnome spun around in dead silence and strode off, even with the assistant's reproach hanging in the air. She broke it down. Master Casado had already burned out years ago, and telling him to copy some old piece felt like a straight-up insult to everything he stood for. Iori strode up to the shield clutching the wolf's head, eyes wide with awe, and asked, straight up, if he could touch the metal. His eyes locked onto the product's flawless proportions, like nothing else in the world mattered. He leaned in and breathed out praise with wild enthusiasm, while the Zen dog just froze, stunned by seeing its own metal twin. Casado, the dwarf blacksmith, snapped his eyes open in pure shock. The girl with glasses burst in and shouted that a massive shipment of materials just landed. The gnome's mouth fell open in pure shock when he laid eyes on the towering mountain of skeletons and monster shells. The girl shot him a nod over her shoulder, because Iori had already set everything in motion. The master's eye twitched with raw, nervous panic. Iori flashed a respectful smile and asked the blacksmith for a favor. Casado narrowed his eyes at the strange weapon hiding behind the kid's back, then nodded, saying he'd listen if he finally showed it. The boy swung his rifle out and revealed its exquisite, finely engraved details. The gnome of the ancients unleashed a long-range magic cannon. Each bullet flew true, carving straight through the adamantine turtle's one and only weak spot. Casado leaned in and said, "You've got something special, kid. Yeah, you're interesting." The master erupted into laughter, thrilled to finally peek into a world of weapons he'd never even known existed before. Iori zeroed in on the moment and snapped, ordering a cast-iron lid for his pot. The gnome is trapped right there, and it looks like he can't get out. The young man grinned and swore that with a lid like that, he could whip up a whole feast of different dishes. Casado erupted for cooking, not weapons or armor. Iori calmly added that he wanted to place an order for weapons, specifically for 2 small beastmen. The twins grinned and shot their hands up. One demanded twin daggers, while the other asked for a long sword. The blacksmith couldn't shake the worry that little kids like them wouldn't matter with weapons. But Iori looked at those small hands and saw the future of strong warriors. Casado was absolutely stunned when he realized these kids had pushed through the demon forest on their own. She said it so sweetly, like it slipped out by accident that Iori lives there. The gnome burst into another laugh, utterly captivated by the sheer strangeness of this group. The master got so fired up that he yanked Spica aside and told her to rush back to the workshop together. He handed her the job, forge the pot lid yourself, while he turned around and started crafting weapons for the quick little ones, built for convenience, not pure brute strength. The girl flashed Iori a grateful smile, and because of his kindness, the old blacksmith's spirits finally surged back to life. She couldn't stop staring at the amazing food, and right then the twins started raving about Iori's dishes. One-eyed Walt stroked his chin, eyes locked in thought, because he could never forget the taste of his own cooking. He told the guy to use the kitchen in the dining room. The towering guild building shot up toward the sky, blazing like it on the whole horizon. Those massive double doors blasted open with a thunderous bang. A light-haired guy burst through the door and shouted from the threshold, asking if Iori was really inside. He froze in place. Walt was already at the table, scarfing down kebabs while the kids sat right there. Walt, stuffing his face, finally blurted out that the food was just ridiculously good. The newcomer snapped with frustration, because they kicked off the whole thing without him. Iori whipped around from the stove and greeted them with a bright, ready grin. The light-haired man blinked in shock, locking eyes with the chef. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Over the years, that boy had grown into someone completely different. Suddenly, Zen's tiny creature popped up with a joyful leap, like it couldn't wait for what came next. That white wolf of his, Chromis, had grown so much it left him absolutely stunned. Now Chromis has somehow swelled to match Zen's size. The man ran his hand over the wolf's fur, stunned that Zen, somehow, had barely changed since those days. The twins shot a sneaky look at each other. Zen was hiding something only he knew. The light-haired guy leaned in and demanded what kind of kids they even were. Then he whipped his head to Iori and made it clear they had a ton to talk about. Walt shot a thumbs up and urged everyone to eat first. He added that they could grab the second-floor living room for their talk. Iori slammed a giant plate of kushikatsu onto the table, piled high with whatever he could grab from the kitchen. From the batter to the final signature sauce, grated apple and onion included, everything was pulled off flawlessly. The man stared at the bamboo skewers, and memories hit him. Nomads tearing meat straight off their swords. He shoved the food in like a man starving, grinning at every saucy bite, while Iori shot me a look like, "Don't dip twice." A stern, dark-haired woman burst in at the door and snapped at Walt for his terrible manners. Iori beamed as he warmly greeted Mrs. Tooley and Lucia, joy practically sparking in his smile. Lucia, the magical white beast, clocked just how far both of them had grown. The moment the twins spotted the talking rabbit, they lit up with pure, unstoppable excitement. Steam from a blazing hot drink billowed up from a wooden mug sitting on the table. The company slid into their seats at the table, and the talk turned into a full-on war room, spotlighting every brutal problem the beastmen were facing across Midgard. Once the last war finally ended, the very soldiers who fought yesterday started getting crushed, and people started spitting that "savages" label at them. The light-haired man grimly said they had to run to them now, strict rules or not, because right here, this is flat-out forbidden. Iori couldn't forget it. Mr. Portos had worn that exact same look on his face once before. The boy slapped a rabbit coin onto the table, then blurted straight away if Walt was some big shot. The man from Tula locked eyes with the others, and the tension between them snapped like a live wire. The woman let out a heavy sigh and chose to lay out every last detail herself. Then she dropped the bombshell. Our friend's real full name is *** Walt Duke Paulette ***, and he's the Duke's second son ***. Lucia told me Walt kept his title hidden because he feared the moment people learned what he was, their friendship would instantly turn fake and slippery. Iori finally got it. Every single person was bowing to him with pure respect for a reason. The light-haired guy confessed that even the guild master couldn't ignore the weight of his origins. They fidgeted and begged to know, did the news truly rattle the boy? Iori just flashed a gentle little smile. He told him straight up that everyone has secrets, then leaned in and demanded Zen show his real self. The tiny creature got swallowed up by a roaring whirlwind of pure energy. In the blink of an eye, Fenrir's massive shadow loomed behind Iori, jaws bared and teeth flashing. While the kid swore, deep down, he was still just a puppy. The whole room, adult adventurers and that magical rabbit included, froze as they stared, mouths agape at the divine beast. The tiny fox giggled as he snugged onto the massive white wolf, staring in awe at how small he looked on that giant frame. She clung to Zen's fluffy neck with all her might. The blonde aristocrat, Walt, got hit with shock so hard he froze on the spot. Right ahead of him stood a rare, pure white wolf, its forehead crowned with a glowing crystal, like a living messenger straight out of ancient godly legends. The tiny fox looked up with innocent eyes and reminded her she had promised to keep the secret. Walt snapped in fury. Why didn't she tell me about that? The dark-haired companion stepped in to protect the little one, because if she hadn't, chaos would have exploded and everyone would have lost their minds. She whipped around to the one-eyed guild master and begged him to lock every detail away and keep it totally secret. He scratched his head in sheer confusion, because meeting the legendary Fenrir for the first time was unreal, and there was no way anyone would believe his story. Walt stared in disbelief. Could it be that even a former S-rank adventurer turned guild master had never once run into creatures like this? Suddenly, his whole vibe turned serious. He leaned in and begged Iori for one favor, to meet his father. The boy was totally lost, because he had zero clue how to talk to lords without messing up the rules. The dark-haired girl gave his shoulder a steady, encouraging pat and told him to stop trying to be anyone else and just be himself. Iori let out a quiet, inward sigh, because refusing wasn't even an option. They hurried down the stairs together, but their companion warned them not to pin too much hope on this meeting. Down below, a guild worker was already waiting, chest packed with cash, grinning as he hailed Iori. "You're a promising newcomer." After checking everything, she announced they'd finally tallied up a whopping 550 gold coins. Iori went rigid, staring at that towering presence in disbelief. A number hit him like lightning, 55 million yen just like that. The guild master told me Iori deserves an A-rank promotion, but to dodge the jealousy brewing in the ranks, we're holding him at sea for now. Walt swore he'd get the company to a great hotel to unwind, then promised he'd tell them the meeting date with his father later. They burst into the buzzing street food area, and the whole place felt alive the second they stepped out. The Lord told everyone to grab a snack from wherever they could, since bringing your own food to the hotel was totally allowed. Suddenly, Iori snapped still in his tracks, and that sharp scent hit his senses like a warning. Walt blurted out, stunned, asking if the kid was seriously into that weird smell. He grimaced and muttered that the local food smelled awful and tasted flat, but Iori was already tuned out. A young saleswoman was stuck behind the counter, staring at that goofy cow sign, so bored it felt like torture. The boy swaggered up to her and asked her about the milk. The girl told them the fresh milk was already gone, but she still had long-life milk on the shelves. She shoved a tiny wedge of holy cheese toward him, daring him to take a bite. Iori took a bite, and in that instant she froze solid. His eyes bulged with pure, instant shock. He lunged forward, face blazing, and roared that he was taking every single item. The saleswoman flinched, stunned by what she just heard. She straight up confessed that nobody wants the product at all, and she doesn't even like it herself. Walt let out a heavy sigh, because he knew Iori would absolutely lose it for those delicious ingredients. The boy's eyes welled up with pure joy as he clutched a real Gouda in his hands. Then he just couldn't wrap his head around how something that priceless could be useless to anyone. When the saleswoman flashed him whipped cream too, Iori's excitement hit so hard he nearly fainted. He confessed he'd been hunting it for nearly 5 years, then dropped to his knees and begged the girl to teach him how to use those products. That happy boy strode forward, clutching a mountain of cheese in his hands, while his friends grinned like they were watching a legend unfold. Before long, they skidded to a stop in front of the towering fireplace in the West Hotel, the adventurers' go-to hideout. Walt leaned in and promised the owner used to be an adventurer, so those familiars won't cause a single problem. For a split second, he froze in place, fighting the urge to move. The foxes huddled together, trembling, and begged, "Tell us, are there any good people here who'll treat us right?" The Lord flashed a huge, confident smile and swung the door wide open. Behind the bar loomed a burly lion beast, and beside him stood a smiling maid. She recognized Walt the instant he walked in. The girl's eyes lit up like fireworks when they spotted the beast man. The maid burst into cheerful claps, beaming as she admired the young guests. Iori begged for the cheapest room in the city for a full month just to get his footing, because settling in meant cramming into a single bed. Walt strode up to the lion owner and leaned in to whisper a crucial message. The lion snapped his orders and forced the maid to set up a huge room for the guests using the cheapest one's price, and Iori couldn't believe it. The shop owner shot the boy a wink, said his name was Dan, and then swore he'd put his full faith in the guild master's and the Lord's recommendations. Rose, the maid, flashed a playful grin and promised she'd cut you a discount like it was her own treat. Foxes bounded around her, chattering in excitement as they finally clocked it. She wasn't just human, she was a beast too. Their new room ended up ridiculously spacious, packed with multiple huge beds. Rose told the exhausted travelers to hit a hot bath and finally breathe easy. One of the foxes couldn't hold it in. When she saw the owners were lion-beast people, her emotions burst wide open. She blurted out in pure joy that every wild story she'd heard about this place ended up being 100% true. The girl launched herself into the soft bed with a full sprint, and right here they could finally breathe, free at last. She dashed around the room with pure joy, soaking up the feeling that she was finally safe. Night crashed over the city, swallowing every street in shadow. After playing to their heart's content, the girls finally crashed into sleep, so happy they couldn't hide it, even with their beastly relatives around. Iori couldn't help but smile, thinking how crazy lucky he was to stumble into people like Porthos, Walt, and the rest. Guys who turned the girls' lives into something that felt like home. He vowed that tomorrow, without fail, he'd storm into church and thank the gods for these new connections. The sun blazed over the rooftops, lighting up the whole world in a bright, cheerful morning glow. Half asleep, Iori stumbled out of the hotel with Zen, grumbling that the wolf could have stayed snoozing right in the room. That massive wolf, Iori, snarled that he wasn't about to stay home. Then he charged straight to the church to meet Lord Ryan. The twin brothers yawned, rubbed the sleep from their eyes, and swore that nobody was going anywhere without them. No exceptions. The girl's smile lit up like fireworks as she counted down to the walk ahead. On his open palm sat a handful of strange candies, like someone packed a shortcut to wakefulness. At dawn, a lion beast blocked the doorway, then leaned in and stared curiously into the bundle. The young man just shoved the sweets into his hands like it was no big deal. The lion jerked back, thinking it was honey, while the maid beside him stared in disbelief and clapped a hand over her mouth at the taste. That sudden, ear-splitting reaction instantly yanked the spotlight onto some shady characters sitting right next to them. The boy calmly said it was a normal extract pulled straight from a plant. The beastman erupted into laughter, already doing the math on how much he could rake in from this. Iori stiffened the moment he felt it, an ugly, dark aura creeping out from the company deeper in that hall. The young man let out a heavy sigh, because those sweets were already turning into bait for the town's drunks. The twins pumped their fists with pure excitement, itching to smash the bad guys. Then the guy swallowed hard and begged them to stay on alert. The Pollitt church's towering spires shot up toward the heavens. A heavy, calm silence swallowed the whole place. Loud footsteps and one sharp question hit his back, right behind him. Edward, the town's priest in a plain cassock, stepped out to meet them. That young man stepped in, smiled, and told him he'd only just arrived yesterday, and he came straight here to pray. The priest snapped his head around, staring back like something just hit him. He grabbed the guests' attention and told them to follow right behind him. The boy dropped to his knees before the colossal altar and clasped his hands tight, like he was about to pray for the impossible. Suddenly, the temple's space ripped open in a blinding flash, and right in front of them stood Lord Ryan, alive and staring back. Behind him, two ghostly figures slammed into each other in midair. These spirits were the twins' parents, They showed up just to personally thank the guardian before fading away for good. The young man swore, with a fierce seriousness, that he'd guard their children from every danger that dared to come near. With calm smiles on their faces, the ghosts vanished into the glow. The deity beamed and praised the young man, saying his insane strength never twisted his humanity. He dropped his eyes in embarrassment, and his real surname came roaring back to him. The wolf surged forward and declared with steel in his voice that he'd never forget where he came from. In the blinding white haze, the silhouettes of his own family from a past world flickered across his eyes for a split second. Mom, Dad. A single tear snapped down his cheek like his heart cracked open. Consciousness plunged straight into a crushing, endless darkness. He jolted awake, eyes snapping wide open, and he sucked in a sharp gasp like he'd been drowning. The vision snapped away. Just like that, he was back on his knees in a normal church, and the kids nearby kept praying in hushed whispers. The wolf shot a worried glance and demanded to know what in the world happened. The young man threw a hand over his face, trying to smother the tremble in his voice. The girl leaned in with a soft, certain smile and told them they had asterisk to come back here again. Edward closed the distance, scanning hard to see whether the guests had wrapped up. The priest blinked in shock and admitted that, during their prayer, a strange warmth had flooded his chest. The massive doors exploded inward, and Walt, Toole, and their familiars rushed through. The priest bowed with respect and greeted the Duke's children like it was the most important moment of the day. Walt gave a quick nod and told them, "Dan sent us here." The boy let out a huge sigh of relief. Turns out he wasn't in trouble at all. He was just trying to find a meeting with them. That tulip tried to usher Walt to work, but he dug in his heels, snapping that protecting the guests was the duchy's job, not his. The young man snapped his eyes shut, then froze in shock. The huge lion was bragging over the candies at the top of its lungs, and that noise turned the boy into a flashing target for bandits. The young man whipped the roll back out and said it was just plain beet sugar, easy to cook, no fuss. With a grin, he said he was ready to hand over the recipe to anyone, anything just to snag a few helpers. The tulip gave so much it even tore away the gift of speech. Outside, Walt leaned in and told them their sprawling, multi-tiered city was built like a fortress. From this moment on, they slammed back wave after wave of brutal assaults from the demon forest monsters. Out by the fields and mills, the poor and the church's orphans are sent out to grind for survival. The young man instantly got the point and blurted out, "Hand the candy making to these folks." Walt couldn't wait. He eagerly volunteered to handle every last formality with the rector. The wolf girl beamed and shoved a handful of sweets into Edward's hands. The priest couldn't even process it. This priceless secret was being handed to him without a fight. The boy muttered through a dark mood that this secret had already dragged in way more trouble than it ever deserved. Walt slammed his handshake down with a fierce nod, convinced that mass public production would fix everything for good. Toole smiled softly, stunned, like he couldn't believe that kind of innocence was real. The young man shot a sly squint and admitted, right there, that his biggest sin was his wild, unstoppable appetite. Iori turned away, and right then, boom, fresh ideas lit up his head. Teach the cheese vendor his lesson and go for the milk, because that boy would never let go of his exact cravings. Iori and the girls jumped into cooking, and before long, cheese became their go-to secret weapon. At the market, a summer vendor was hawking magical herbs, the kind you use to blast back monsters. Iori's mind snapped to it in a flash, like an idea just lit him up out of nowhere. He snatched up every possible spice on the shelf, and the saleswoman went pale with fear. With a full basket of herbs on his arm, the boy bolted off to hunt down wheat flour. The harsh forest didn't change him one bit, and his companions were overjoyed. At last, the bag they needed was finally found. As the beast woman crunched on the cracker, Marl leaned in and asked if he'd start baking bread. Iori shot back that you don't just use flour to bake bread, you can make way more than that. One of his comrades piped up and urged them to swing by Casado's workshop, just down the way. The blacksmith drops the finished order on the counter, already wrapped up and ready. Iori couldn't stop staring at the flawless pot. No cracks, not even one. The blacksmith couldn't stop praising his assistant, because they hammered on that cauldron all night long. The young assistant of the master finally confessed that they'd been working on nothing but pure hype and stubborn passion. The gnome leaned in and demanded, with intense precision, why that boy needed a grill so bizarre. Iori told him, if you shove coal on the lid, the heat won't just rise, it'll blast from every direction. The blacksmith's stomach growled treacherously, like it was about to betray him. The girl was furious. They were working their hearts out with zero food and not a drop of water. Iori pulled them to the table with a grin that looked way too friendly. Right by the city gates, it hit him. He had to keep his promise and teach that merchant how to make hard milk. Suddenly, the girls locked onto a gloomy man with a mustache, dressed in a jumpsuit. Kadia's father flew into a furious rage and attacked Iori, blaming him for the business that got ruined. His daughter tried to soothe him, but the milkman sighed that the milk goes bad way too fast. Iori's eyes flared bright the moment he spotted the cart. He promised to make up the losses if it all went wrong, then grabbed a single canister to test. The boy skipped off with the milk like it was nothing, and the man just stood there utterly stunned. Marl laughed it off, telling everyone, even in the worst case, that Guy'll still seal everything up in the golem refrigerator. The mission is fully underway now. No more delays, it's go time. Iori grabbed a clean jar and poured in some milk. He demanded that Katja shake it hard and mix it up good. Iori stood tall in front of the confused milkman, confidently laying it out. Fat just splits from water, no heat needed. As the father blinked, the beast people surged in to snatch and rattle the jars. He dumped the last of the milk onto the fire and watched it start to heat up. A lemon has just been thrown into the game, just like that. A juicy slice of cut lemon snapped into focus, and you could practically taste the sharp, necessary hit of acidity. The girls' faces scrunched as that sour taste hit them hard. Iori said the acid would rip the protein apart and force it to split. After squeezing the curds and tossing in salt, he finally pulled out a perfectly delicate cheese. Marl and his friend instantly realized it just melts in your mouth. But the milkman took one sip and declared the taste way too bland. Meanwhile, something freaky started brewing inside Katja's jaw. Iori reached in and hauled out fresh butter with a grin, like he just pulled off the biggest win of the day. It was time to fire up the new grill, and before you knew it, the Hasselback potatoes were coming out hot and ready. It turned out to be ridiculously simple. Just slits cheese, bacon, then pour on melted butter and herbs like you mean it. The gnome and his poor assistant were nearly in tears, absolutely stunned by the culinary shock. Iori said with full confidence that this pot can handle any asterisk dish you throw at it. Marl, half lost in daydreams, recalled that elf like a treat he couldn't wait to devour. The milkman chewed a piece of food in total silence. The buttery richness and the silky tenderness of the cheese hit him so hard it shook him to the very depths of his soul. He slumped onto the stump, crushed by the brutal realization of what he'd been doing for years. Iori leaned in and softly urged the man forward. He shoved a hunk of plain hard cheese in front of him and vowed he'd show everyone what it could really do. A mystery bag of flour suddenly dropped onto the table, like it came out of nowhere. The beast people snapped their ears up in shock. Iori lunged into action and started rolling out the dough. When they asked if it was a game, he smirked and said he was busy preparing pasta. Those perfectly cut strips paired with any sauce like magic. The bechamel was already churning and bubbling in the pot, like it was about to burst into something legendary. And just like that, the boy yanked out his magical musket. Comrade's been hit, wounded and bleeding from the fight. Iori smirked and announced, with zero mercy, that he wasn't sparing a single slice of cheese today. A blazing pillar of fire slammed into the dish, and the girls erupted into terrified screams. A stranger's stare snapped into place, and pure silent awe hit like lightning. That gooey cheese in the middle of the plate erupted in bubbling waves, spreading a rich, mouth-watering aroma that hit you instantly. Iori lifted the sniper rifle, aiming to fire magical bullets instead of that kitchen burner. With a confident grin, he tossed the pasta into a sizzling hot skillet and smothered it in a thick, gooey cheese sauce. Right away, a piping hot ready meal was already steaming on the plate. The boy broke it down step by step, starting with melted butter, then sliding in the meat right at the end. Everyone in the room just stared, blown away by a flavor so rich it didn't even taste like their boring old whole milk. The old cheesemaker blinked in disbelief, realizing this cheese had been marinating in the earthen cellar since before his grandfather was even born. Katia and her father couldn't believe it. This was the exact flavor of their own product, and it hit like magic in their mouths. Yori explained that even after the milk dries up, it still stays locked in and preserved. Their awesome cellar kept everything perfectly poised as the fruits ripened to their peak. Katja's father leaned in and called him, straight up, an incredible kid. The man crushed his handshake tight, then leaned in and apologized for every doubt he'd thrown at him before. Next, they tossed in chunks of cheese to make the hot bechamel melt into pure magic. Walt eagerly dug into the fondue, stunned that something so simple could taste this brilliant. Iori pitched selling that sauce like a rumor bomb, trying to prove the real flavor of processed cheese was something way bigger. Without hesitation, Father agreed right away. Katia would cook, and he'd handle the sales himself. The man slammed his chest and swore that from this moment on, he'd be strong enough to work for three. Meanwhile, the bearded man clocked it immediately. Something else was getting cooked in that stove. Yori spun around and locked eyes on the truth. This was his final meal. And right there with the pasta, he also twisted up some tubular macaroni meant for slow baking. In a heartbeat, the hot cheese casserole was ready to hit the table. Cheery shouts from happy tasters bounced through the yard, buzzing with pure satisfaction. Pollitt's towering walls rose up like a fortress, looming over the cloudy sky. Walt swore the city would explode into fame as a gourmet capital, and Lucia watched their food scene change at breakneck speed. The girl scowled, because that loud sugar scandal from high society was never going to let Yori breathe easy. Walt pushed the idea that he needed to get ahead of everything and find protection with his older brother. Dawn breaks over the fireplace in the West Hotel, lighting up the whole place like the start of trouble. Iori flashed a grin at the beast people and offered them the leftover cheese from yesterday, like it was a gift meant just for them. He demanded they guard the recipe in total secrecy until the Katja family finally kicks off their sales. The boy grinned like he had secrets and teased them with the promise of a much wilder treat coming today. The girls snapped their attention forward, eyes wide, demanding to know what was coming next. Straight ahead, a towering masterpiece rose into view, the exact building where Walt would finally meet his older brother. An elderly servant bowed deeply and greeted them right at the doorway. They were already there, caught in the spotlight, as everyone waited for them in that bright, wide hall. Nikolai, Walt's older brother, stepped up, introduced himself, and jabbed a finger toward his dark familiar Denny. The man gripped Iori's hand and yanked it once, hard, thanking him for saving the cub. Iori snapped his eyes wide, stunned to find the man in front of him was Lucia's own husband. The white familiar with the crystal crown quietly looked away, like it was scared of what it might see. Nikolai nodded, confirmed it was true, and then thanked them again, warm as firelight. The beast people leaned in, eyes blazing as they gawked at the creatures' colorful foreheads, crystals glittering like treasures. Nikolai told them, these creatures defend everyone by summoning a magical shield. He couldn't stop thinking about that intrusive woman who'd cornered Walt at the hotel yesterday. Right when things were about to go off the rails, the familiar stepped in and pulled them away from her sloppy, drunken hugs. The brothers burst into hearty laughter, replaying that hilarious scene like it was pure gold. Yori felt a huge wave of relief that everything turned out okay. Then Nikolai's whole vibe snapped serious as he hit them with a sweet excuse and bluntly asked, "So, are you ready to hand this gold vein to someone?" Yori shot back that he wants the profit funneled to the townspeople, and that sugar must be run officially by the ducal house. Then he leaned in with one condition. Nikolai shot his eyebrow up in pure shock. The boy leaned in and said he'd funnel every last profit straight into beefing up the city walls and taking care of orphans. Nikolai blurted in stunned disbelief that safeguarding the townspeople really was their direct duty. That's why Iori chose to put his trust in their family. Nikolai bowed low, swore to Lord Ryan he'd earned that trust, and promised he'd make it mean something. He warned that total selflessness smells fishy, so he pressed Iori to name at least a few rewards. The boy scratched his chin with innocent curiosity, then asked for a plain, regular hammer. Walt burst out laughing at how wild his friend was, then told his brother to keep an eye out for that kind of little surprise at the market. Iori whipped up a brand new lineup of sugary desserts right then and there, and swore he'd officially register them soon. Lucia's eyes snapped wide with pure shock. Lucia snapped in shock, so he's not selling the product at all. He's selling the method to make it. Nikolai doubted Iori could really turn a profit using only those recipes. The boy shut his eyes like he meant it, then boldly swore his intentions were dead serious. He said it like a promise. Those easy recipes spark fresh ideas, and watching people savor everyone else's mouth-watering food is the real reward he lives for. With that kind of foresight, Nikolai suddenly lost the gift of speech. Then boom, he erupted into loud, unstoppable laughter that ricocheted through the whole hall. He finally admitted he gets it now. Exactly why Walt clung to that total weirdo. Nikolai couldn't resist, so the second he heard about these brand new sweets, he demanded a taste right then. Iori had been counting down to this moment. He pulled out a full kettle and declared it was officially tea time. The beast people squealed with pure joy because he'd slipped out in the night and loaded up treats, while everyone else was dead asleep. Iori strode in with the foxes and the white wolf, grinning like he owned the road as fresh adventures waited ahead. The boy stormed into the hall and slammed a heavy grill onto the table before the stunned aristocrats. Chamomile tea hissed and steamed in the cups, ready to warm the whole room. The nobles froze in shock, because these herbs were normally sold only to drive bugs away. Iori hooked his fingers on the lid, grinned like he had a secret plan, because no tea party is complete without the real main event. With a burst of motion, he yanked the lid wide open. On the baking grid, rosy cookies sat in perfect wolf-paw shapes, and the foxes gleamed with pure, joyful sparkle. He told me it was simple. He just whisked flour, sugar, and butter with eggs, then shoved the dough into the oven and baked it till it was ready. The foxes burst out, squealing that the cookies were crunchy and sweet. The aristocrat nodded in satisfaction, saying the flavor matched the drink perfectly. The boy said the sweets don't just taste great with tea. They stand for real hospitality and help break the ice between people. The wolf locked eyes with the cookie, almost trembling with love, because it looked so perfect it felt like a crime to bite into it. Iori admitted that light cookies are brutally hard to bake, so she had to dye those brown patches with tea. The nobleman snapped that you can't bake like that without a massive oven. Then Iori whipped out pudding and handed it over. You can steam it right in a normal home pot. No special gear, no drama. 5 portions slammed onto the table in gorgeous patterned glasses, catching the light like a Showtime reveal. The woman knight stared at the dessert, blown away by how delicate and silky smooth its texture was. The fox girls snatched their servings with delighted squeals and demanded, "We want those glasses too." Iori bragged that he went out of his way to buy this dish from the Paulo and Carlo store, just for the ethnic ornament on it. He snatched the black cup for himself, while the chanterelles darted in and grabbed the blue and red ones in a flash. The masters carved that same brutal pattern into the wolf's world, seared onto a wooden bowl. The knightess beamed warmly as the kids dug into the very same dishes, knowing those tastes would stick in their hearts long after the meal ended. The aristocrat didn't just compliment the flavor. He raved about how flawlessly the dish was presented. But his eyes snapped to the bitter dark sauce pooling on the pudding. He couldn't wrap his mind around it. This soft, gentle sweetness was still sugar, not the honey they were used to. Iori leaned in and said the candy is caramelized sugar, cooked till it turns rich and golden. The boy blushed hard and tiptoed up to ask, in the quietest voice possible, how the local nobles actually eat honey. His caramel didn't match their honey even a little, so the old servant demanded he bring a sample for a direct showdown. A thick, golden liquid dripped in slow, mesmerizing streams into the pot. While an aristocrat spooned up costly honey like it was nothing, Iori cringed hard at the pure extravagance. The nobleman stepped in and generously handed the boy the pot, straight up offering him the chance to test it. This was the perfect trade. Sweet cash for every sweet treat he'd slaved over and made. Iori's eyes flashed with excitement. He'd already cooked up a brand new recipe, and he thanked everyone like he couldn't contain his joy. Before he left, he pulled Skull and Patty aside and fired off a serious request. The boy put them in charge and told them to teach Nikolai and the other kids in the shelter how to pull sugar out. The girls chopped the beets into tiny cubes, then simmered them into a thick, glossy syrup. The adults stared in stunned silence at the towering heap of white sand, totally floored that the kids pulled it off completely on their own. Only now did the Knights finally get it. Iori had cracked open the whole production process and made it public for everyone to see. The aristocrats' frown deepened as the truth hit. These skills would draw greedy nobles in fast, like blood in the water. Iori let out a tired sigh by the stove. He hated shady intrigues and wanted nothing to do with yet another round of nobility drama. He prized his freedom like gold and decided to stack his cash by living off his skills as an adventurer. Once he climbs to a high rank, the nobleman told him, he won't be able to dodge those personal orders from the aristocrats anymore. The boy blurted, completely rattled, "This is a total disaster, and it's actually real." Then the aristocrat threw him a lifeline. "Join us as our exclusive mercenary and walk out alive." Rage sharpened the man's gaze, turning it cold and deadly serious. He leaned in and straight up asked if Iori wanted to be the Pollitt family's exclusive knight. "It gives you rock-solid protection, yet still lets you move however you want." The boy fell silent for a heartbeat, then nodded and agreed without a word. The nobleman froze at that lightning-fast reply, and even admitted he was terrified of getting rejected. He admitted the one real catch. From now on, everything Iori accomplishes will get credited to their family instead. Honestly, he didn't even mind at all. Then his expression turned stone cold. He warned that if danger ever came for his loved ones, they'd just vanish straight into the forest of demons. Zen's surroundings snapped into chaos as lightning flared and lit up the air in sudden, violent bursts. The wolf morphed into a towering monster, loomed over the nobleman like a nightmare, and roared that it only answers to Iori. The adults' faces drained of color, because only now did they finally recognize him as the divine Fenrir. The aristocrat's voice shook as he vowed, before God himself, that he'd never lie in a holy place like this. Fenrir slowly squinted his eyes and finally steadied his breath. The tension finally let up, and Iori calmly promised he'd defend their home too. He refused to go back to that wild forest. No way, no chance. The boy flashed a warm smile and told them, "This estate is Pollitt's, our second home." The nobleman loosened his grip, then greeted him properly, once again speaking for the whole family, vowing that protection would be guaranteed. He swore he'd never touch the boy's family as leverage, and if it ever came to it, he'd straight up ask for help. Then he leaned in and narrowed his eyes like a secret was brewing, because right then, he demanded something. The man fumbled and pointed at the pot, because that brand new dish's mouth-watering smell had been driving him crazy for ages. Steam blasted out from under the pot lid, and a piping hot cassella pancake was revealed in an instant. The whole company lunged for the dessert at once, swooning over its fluffy dough and the honey that tasted like a real gift. The recipe ended up way easier than it sounds. You whip the egg whites, stir the dough with honey, bake it until it's golden, then finish it off with a buttery flavor. Towering city spires clawed upward toward the cloudy sky. Iori strolled down the street with the twins, grinning ear to ear at Mr. Nikolai's unbelievable generosity. Iori pushed us to grab the ordered gear first and hit the books hard, prepping like our one job was the only thing that mattered. Their journey crashed straight into Casado's workshop. That stern, bearded master swung the door open and met them right on the doorstep, already armed with the gear they'd need. The girls snatched up the new blades in a flash, slashing through the air with a sharp whistle right there in the store. Their eyes sparkled like they could barely contain the thrill. The blacksmith let out a quiet, sharp snort. Iori slipped into his new suit too, and the little kids immediately lit up, giving him a flood of approving thumbs up. The sweet seamstress leaned in and told him she stitches all her everyday and women's clothes to order, one perfect piece at a time. The wolf familiar flashed a huge grin, totally loving the master's fresh new cool look. Iori flashed a grateful smile after receiving the gloves, and that's when he learned the real secret. Every piece of clothing was stitched with arachne thread to keep him protected for real. With pure gratitude blazing in his chest, the boy slammed a heavy barrel onto the table. He knew the dwarves couldn't resist a good drink, so he hauled in the finest spring wine he could find. And for a snack, he stacked up a whole mountain of just grilled chicken skewers. The blacksmith and the mistress finally loosened up, smiling as they raised their glasses and cheered the delicious meat. They grabbed the weapons and hammered out the armor like their lives depended on it. The market stalls were roaring with life, noise, movement, and energy bursting from every corner. Iori skidded to a stop right in front of the fur baskets near one of the shops. She showed them coarse demonic goat hair for winter gear, and then she flipped to the soft fleece of a sylph sheep, like magic. The twins stared straight into his eyes, hope blazing there, silently waiting for the purchase to finally go through. But the boy shook his head. Right now, all he needed was a sewing kit and some fabric. Next up was the Colossal Adventurers, guild building, towering like a challenge waiting to be conquered. Iori froze in front of the task board and tore through the contracts at lightning speed. His eyes locked in like a laser beam. With total confidence, he slammed the chosen form onto the stone slab right in front of the registrar. The magical seal blasted with brilliant light. Boom! The mission was officially accepted. With a warm goodbye to the elf at the counter, the whole team surged toward the exit. Right after they walked out, a one-eyed master from the guild slipped in and found the girl. He leaned in, eyes sparkling, and demanded to know what the newcomer picked for his debut. That awkward smiling elf girl unrolled the scroll, and boom, it was a hunt for two demonic goats. Right as the conversation was heating up, a tall, light-haired elf knight slipped in from behind, quiet as a shadow, cutting everything off in one sudden moment. A tiny, almost invisible smile flickered across his face like a secret he couldn't hold back. The registrar and the master spun around in shock at their deputy, Eleanor. The elf replayed how calmly Iori sat down with the kids and laid out the exact tactics for taking down high-ranking monsters. That's why he's so sure. Weak little creatures don't catch the boy's eye anymore, and he's about to shock everyone again. Meanwhile, the crew had already charged into the gloomy demon forest, where dry, fallen tree trunks carpeted the ground. Iori leaned in and quietly asked the wolf Zen one thing. Could he hear the prey? The beast snarled a brutal warning. Those targets weren't just hiding nearby, they'd burrowed deep in the thicket. The twins couldn't stop themselves and blurted, "Why not just grab the fluffy fur from the market, huh?" Iori grinned like he meant it. Handing over cash was way too dull for him, so he decided to grab every single material himself. Then boom! A deafening crack tore through the air, and a hulking demonic goat erupted in front of them, crackling with vicious bolts of lightning. Iori rocked a water gun while the fox girls, Scum and Patty, splashed around in the river like the world didn't have a single worry. Out of nowhere, a massive demonic goat lunged at them, and the boy immediately bolted in front, trying to steal the monster's focus. The dagger-wielding girls exploded into motion out of nowhere, and Iori couldn't believe how fast they were. The twin duo snapped their attack in perfect sync, smashing straight into the monster and halting it mid-charge. The boy squinted hard, like he was trying to pry the truth out of the shadows. The beast let out a savage roar that shook the whole place. Iori's fur crackled with lightning, and he roared at his partners to back up, right now. A massive lightning blast tore down the sky, and slammed right in front of the twins. They barely pulled it off and snapped back just in time. The monster snarled and bared its teeth, priming itself to unleash the next brutal attack. Right then, that white wolf slammed into his head at full speed. The girls erupted in happy cheers, shouting Zen's name as he showed up just in time and cut through the enemy to protect them. Suddenly, the wolf went rigid midair, screaming as that brutal electric shock tore through it. The twins shrieked in pure terror. Then the Zen discharge suddenly fizzled out. The demonic goat's eye blazed with pure, ferocious fury. An enormous maw loomed over the tiny wolf cub, swallowing up the whole world in shadow. The monster lunged with a brutal snap, but Zen shot through the gap between its horns like he'd seen it coming. The wolf's size vanished, but its power stayed, and with Iori finally lining up his shot, it kept the enemy locked down under its weight. That perfect shot drilled clean through the monster's head, like it never had a chance. A massive carcass slammed onto the ground with a bone-jarring thud. The girls were still twitching from the aftershock, and it hit them. There was one more job they had to crush. Zen snapped his head up, ears twitching as that unbelievably familiar scent hit him like a punch. Just as the bushes rustled again, another goat stumbled out, and this one was so tiny it looked like it couldn't even keep up. The twins lunged at him on the spot, fists swinging like thunder. In the blink of an eye, they hoisted their weapons triumphantly over the defeated baby. Iori scanned the paper and with a sharp nod, confirmed the mission was a complete win. Now it's time, hunt down those sheep. Two fluffy little balls bobbed peacefully in the water, drifting like they owned the whole pond. Cradling them in his arms, the boy promised, "Don't worry, I'm only here for the wool, I'm not hurting you." On the way back, they said, "Let's grab some useful berries and leaves," and went hunting for them right then. They tore back into the city and barreled straight to the Adventurers Guild. The employee behind the counter froze in pure, stunned disbelief. In the heart of the square, a giant slain monster lay gutted and still, and the young man bolted straight to the master to report it. The master stared at the ink, saw lightning splashing out like a curse, and then demanded, was it Iori who finally beat that monster? The master with the patch over his eye went, "For most rookies, that's instant death," and the girls just shrugged it off like it was nothing. "It's kinda ticklish." They hauled in the bodies, and the guild workers snapped through the details fast, counting how clean those twin strikes were, and confirming Iori's fatal blow landed perfectly. The girls were genuinely shocked they could read the whole battle, start to finish, just by following the tracks. Sure he could trust this team's insane power, the young registrar leaned in and asked the master, "So what happens next?" The master nodded that the twins' skills were seriously impressive, then let out a heavy sigh, because keeping it all hidden any longer would be a pain. The master blew everyone away with his call. Iori shoots straight to rank A and the twins. Rank C, no delay. The boy tried to argue against that brutal jump, but the old man stayed stone calm and told him it would only be a question of time. A sharp-looking elf in full knightly armor stepped in, and with a grin, vouched that their achievements were every bit as impressive as everyone thought. She leaned in and said, "I'm Alina, your guild master's deputy." That woman cut Iori off mid-introduction, and flat out told him, if he wanted a real shot at his future in the ducal house, he'd need the kind of high status that opens doors. The moment the boy tapped his magic card, the whole screen snapped to new information. Scum and Patty burst into delighted jumps, gripping their brand new certificates tight in their hands. With the sun finally gone, the whole team slipped into the dark streets, moving through the city like they were chasing something. Suddenly, Zen snapped his head up. Someone was watching them. Iori slammed to a sudden halt. The wolf let out a low, quiet growl, like that pursuer's scent had haunted him before. The boy let out a heavy sigh, finally getting what too much attention can do, and he decided to snip the tail off before it got worse. He leaned in and whispered to the girls, telling them to get ready to sprint. At the command, all four exploded into motion and vanished into the night city. Night swallowed the quiet tavern whole, like darkness was locking the door. Inside the bar, a burly lion bartender was pouring drinks when, boom, some heavy rumbling crashed in from outside. Zen, the white wolf, burst into the hall with pure joy, like he couldn't wait another second. Right behind them, the twin fox cubs burst in, yapping at top speed about how fast Zen was, while the poor lion stood there, utterly lost, watching everything spiral out of control. With a guilty grin, Iori confessed that he'd turned tracking them into a full-blown race. The lion snapped its head up, ears blazing with alarm, because this didn't sound peaceful at all. The second Iori flashed that Orank adventurer card, the innkeeper practically had a heart attack. His eyes were about to pop clean out of his skull. In the blink of an eye, he was roaring with laughter, thrilled because he'd finally found the perfect reason to celebrate. Lev rolled up his sleeves and marched straight for the kitchen with pure determination. A massive, juicy steak slammed onto the table. The tiny foxes burst into excited cries, practically salivating over the meat. Iori sliced in one clean move, then froze mid-breath, because that simple bite of beef tasted unlike anything he'd ever had. The fox smirked and admitted quietly that he almost never gets meals like this, because most days he's the one cooking for himself. The boy grinned like sunshine, and those dishes he made just for you somehow hit different every single time. The girl practically sprinted to the kitchen, itching to help. Iori lit up with excitement and promised her he'd teach her how to cook. The second fox with burning eyes grabbed a knife and swore it would carve the meat, while Iori's guts churned, terrified she might not be able to pull off that brutal task. Lev's jaw tightened when he realized the twins had climbed ranks too. This was the quickest career jump in ages. The innkeeper snapped at the boy to watch out for other adventurers, but with the ducal house guarding him, pursuers wouldn't stand a chance. Finally, the lion growled a warning. Soon, eager lions would swarm to snatch the boy for their own crew or step up and demand a duel. That constant meddling left a sour taste in his mouth, but the innkeeper just chuckled, because he'd been driven into retirement by the exact same torment. He offered the boy a real job as a cook, honestly promising that if the adventurer life got too brutal, he'd always have a way back. Dawn finally broke through, and the morning was here. Someone started pounding on the door, shouting to find out if Iori was still asleep. The maid said a man showed up, claimed he was an old acquaintance, and even apologized for dropping in so early. Baffled Iori, fresh in the city with no clue who anyone was, still let the guest inside. The old wooden door groaned as it swung wide. A hooded man in a cloak stood right at the doorstep, his eyes hidden in shadow as if he'd been waiting for a reason. The guest yanked the fabric aside with a sharp, no-nonsense shove. Iori immediately clocked Marl, and before the boy could even breathe, she snapped at him over yesterday's escape, furious to the core. Just then Zen the wolf cut in, cool as ice, and said he recognized an old buddy the moment the scent hit him. Marl snapped his eyes open and screamed in panic. He had no clue the beast could actually talk. Iori shot out an apology for the sudden escape, and the guest, still frozen in shock, finally admitted he just couldn't wrap his head around the legendary Fenrir actually being there. While he was still recovering, the adventurer locked eyes with the boy and admitted, straight up, that chasing that A-rank was the right call. He barked an order for everyone to meet at the Duke's, then reassured them that the suspicious pursuers snapped back the moment they realized Iori had ties to the Walt house. Outside, a jaw-dropping black carriage, pure luxury from top to bottom, waited right there for them. Iori said it with a dreamy grin. He wants to get the same one for himself someday. The wheels clattered over the cobblestones, and the talk instantly morphed into how they'd repair and tweak the suspension. The fox girls clutched their fists with wild excitement, practically vibrating with impatience. The twins beamed and introduced themselves, Patty and Skal, while Marl just grinned back and told them his name. Zen grinned at the kids and, with a warm voice, welcomed them like they were his own family. Marl's face spasmed with a sharp, uncontrollable twitch. Little foxes clung to Marl with tiny whimpers, and Marl's heart melted as he barely managed a soft breath, because it was just so sweet. He suddenly broke down in tears, shouting that he wants a family too, while admitting he doesn't even have a wife. The kids erupted in laughter, teasing him as loud but somehow hilarious. A carriage roared toward the majestic castle on the horizon. On my way, Yori's eyes caught the windmill and stretched out for miles, the endless sea of farmland. The boy suddenly stopped dead in his tracks. Right in the middle of the field, Mr. Walt stood there gripping his notes, while his magical beast spun circles nearby, as if it was itching for something to happen. Yori burst into joy and called out to him with a bright, excited voice. The aristocrat spun around and beamed, as he warmly congratulated the young man on his promotion. Yori awkwardly brushed it off, then blurted an apology, because Marl's feelings had turned the noise up way too loud. Walt grinned at the adventurer, who was already laughing and playfully chasing the foxes around. He paused and replayed Marl's just-finished trip in his mind, like every detail mattered. Tamed, he finally found out what the twins went through, broke down into bitter tears, and now he genuinely feels for every beast person out there. Walt shook off his dark mood, dove back into work and picked a spot to plant beets. A sudden spark of insight flared in Yori's eyes. He shot a confident finger at the patch of ground, dark, earthy soil that looked exactly like the spot where they'd just been hunting wild beets. Walt let out a defeated sigh. This field was dead, and no matter how he kept pumping magical energy into it, it never woke up. Yori proposed saving the ruined land with plain fertilizers, no magic at all, and that wild idea instantly hooked the aristocrat. The whole crew surged forward, leaving the last danger behind as they pushed into what came next. They screeched to a stop before the massive Walt estate, turning it into a city hospital whenever the crises hit. A whole line of maids swept into place, and the elderly butler bowed so low it felt ceremonial. Then he gestured the guests into the study. In that lavish hall, Duke Tamed, the city's ruler himself, stepped forward, ringed by his knights, and greeted the savior of his family with a warm welcome. Every servant and every guard on the estate packed in together, all in one place. A whole crew of guards and highborn nobles stood shoulder to shoulder in a perfect line, waiting right in front of the guests. Those tiny beast people shook with pure terror. Walt let out a tired, hopeless sigh, like he'd already accepted the worst. His father snapped, blew up on him, and started tearing into him for frightening the kids with that huge crowd. You couldn't even help it. You were nervously explaining yourself, because you never expected this place to be packed with people. The hulking giant in heavy armor pointed at the father's servant and declared, "Noah." Edgar and Fran froze in place, standing right beside the guards like they were afraid to breathe. Behind them loomed butler Kristoff, flanked by a whole cluster of maids. Walt leaned in and told the guests, "Don't be scared, out here your family." Yori softly patted the little ones on the head, and just like that, their tense little bodies finally melted into calm. The nobleman strode up again, ready to reintroduce himself face to face. Yori stepped up, introduced himself, and showed off the familiars. Then he thanked them for saving the city. The old master of the estate gave a sharp, approving nod. He shot a stern look straight at Walt and Nikolai. The father leaned in and demanded, "Wait, are you seriously the same young man who was promised that exclusive contract?" Walt dipped his head in respect and asked the old man to take a close look at the boy himself. Yori's eyes snapped open with a sharp jolt of surprise. The nobleman leaned in and started laying out every term of their agreement. He made it clear this wasn't about big wins. It was an official shakedown, and nobody was expecting the newcomer to pull off miracles. Then he spun toward his father and blurted that Yori had already scored an A rank. The old man froze in stunned terror, completely baffled. How on earth could this boy have killed someone? Walt told the young man to show the trophy's head only, because the full carcass wouldn't fit through the room. Right in the heart of the hall, a monstrous skull made of hired demonic goat materialized with a thunderous rumble. Nikolai lunged at his brother, fists flying, shouting that he needed answers. Why on earth he'd hidden that kind of power? Walt gently reminded him to remember the feathers of the stone bird. 5 years back, he swore it was Yori who killed that monster. Yet nobody in the room would believe a word. Nikolai shut his mouth and the silence hit like a punch. He admitted that even now, it's still hard to wrap his head around what happened. Everyone froze in disbelief, staring at the undeniable proof of just how insanely strong that guy really was. Her father snapped at the question. What magic could possibly kill a monster like that with one single shot? Walt just told me to stop fighting it and accept the truth. Yori's special, and he's got advantages no one else can match. The guard snapped into tense, ready for trouble mode. Fran's guard balked, saying she couldn't handle some mystery power, and demanded to know who the boy really was. A fight erupted. Fran swore she was told to stand watch, but I got snapped right back with the rule. The moment Iori becomes an exclusive adventurer, Fran's guest privileges are gone. Iori pulled out a weapon and basically dared him to prove it. Open the window and let's see what you've got. He burst out onto the balcony, squared his stance and took aim. The young man's eyes snapped cold and laser-focused in an instant. He calmly said, like it was no big deal, that a killer ant is creeping just a few kilometers from here. A deafening gunshot cracked through the air. Even with all the tension in the air, the guards stared in shock, because that monster just refused to smash through the estate's barrier. Yori slowly lowered the barrel, like he was buying time with every breath. The young man flashed a grin and told him straight up that the target was already destroyed. An old nobleman fumed and barked, "Go check this nonsense right now." Steward Christoph whipped around and slipped away into the dark to scout ahead in total silence. Time slipped by. Walt's father was still wrecked by everything he'd seen. Iori told us his sniper rifle could fire enchanted bullets that streaked across massive distances. He casually said, "I've wiped out ants like that from twice the distance before." It looked like he could smash anything his eyes locked onto. Suddenly, the door flew open with a violent blast. On the doorstep, a deathly pale butler loomed, clutching a basket like it held the next twist. At the very bottom, an ant's corpse lay sprawled, its head pierced straight through. The guards were drenched in cold sweat, panic creeping over their faces. The woman knight gulped, heart hammering as she forced herself to swallow. She gasped in horror, finally seeing just how lethal this young man really was. The knightess snapped that if betrayal struck, they wouldn't stand a chance to stop him. Yori calmly flicked his eyes over his shoulder. Walt cut through the panic with a grin, saying he actually liked this guy, while Nikolai snapped at the guards to shut it and stay silent. That nobleman slammed the rules down and absolutely forbid anyone from doubting their choice. But the woman wouldn't calm down. She kept drilling the truth into everyone. Iori could wipe them all out in a single instant. She stared at her owners with raw horror, stunned that they could be so carefree.